But I want to start out with my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, "The American Dream Demands Paid Sick Leave and Low-Cost Child Care." American families with children are about, and the American dream that they're trying to live, are about to face a really serious crisis here. I mean, counterintuitively, the pandemic brought a child care boon to working families with kids. This was in large part to the extraordinary efforts of Nancy Pelosi in the House and Bernie Sanders in the Senate, who got billions for expanded child care funds for families in distress. And although those are technically emergency funds, they're similar. I mean, these are funds that pay for the cost of children to go to child care or fund child care agencies. These are similar to what you find in pretty much every other developed country in the world as routine stuff. You know, for us, it was, oh, it's COVID, it's an exception. But those funds are expiring this month. At the end of this month, an estimated 3.2 million children in the United States, and these would be, you know, our most vulnerable children, are going to lose free child care. And this is going to lead to the shutdown of an estimated 70,000 child care programs. Let that sink in. 3.2 million children, 70,000 child care programs. This is just crazy. You know, the backstory to this, of course, is that our employment policies go back to FDR. Back at the time, you know, when FDR created the Department of Labor, essentially, the U.S. Department of Labor, which was created with the Wagner Act and the National Labor Relations Act in 1935. It did some good stuff. I mean, you know, the Fair Labor Standard, actually it was the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938, the FSLA, which established the minimum wage, created boundaries on the ability of employers to exploit their workers, and outlawed child labor. But it also restricted women's labor. Now, the reason they did that in 1938 was because, you know, in 1938, through basically the 1960s, the norm in America was a single wage earner household. Dad worked, mom stayed home and took care of the kids, by and large, generally speaking. And, you know, the economy was constructed, the post-FDR economy was constructed in a way that worked. I mean, I grew up in one of those households. My mom never went to work. My dad, although she was working when she met my dad, you know, after they got married, she stopped working and, you know, had 4 kids and just stayed home the rest of her life. That doesn't work anymore. I mean, if you look at household income, and, you know, 9 times out of 10 when you're looking at middle-class income statistics or working class income or any income statistics, 9 times out of 10 what you see listed are household income. Household income includes all the people living in the household who are generating income. So if you look at the household income statistics from Ronald Reagan's presidency to today, what you see is that there's been a steady increase in household income. And, you know, it's gone up substantially. It's gone up from, you know, in the 20,000 range, I believe, in the 1980s to around the $50,000 range now. Household income. But when you look at individual income, what you find is that individual income is down right now from where it was in 1980. So why is it that household income has gone up while individual income has actually gone down? Because what happened was 2 income, you know, wage-earning families. In other words, middle-class families who wanted to live the American dream have had to have 2 wage earners to do what 1 wage earner could do before Reaganomics bit us. And if you're going to have 2 wage earners, and this, by the way, this is a worldwide phenomenon. I mean, you know, in some part, this goes back to the 1960s, the birth control pill, the hormonal birth control pill, the one that Republicans in 5 states now are trying to outlaw. That birth control pill was legalized by the Food and Drug Administration in 1951, and around the world within a year of that. So by 1965, the first couple of years, you know, people were wary of it. They didn't know what to make of it. But by 1965, the vast majority of American women who were using birth control pills, and they were very, very reliable. And you combine that with the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, or for that matter, in the 60s, California, New York, and several other blue states legalized abortion. In fact, about a third of America had legalized abortion in 1973 when Roe v. Wade came along. This was all part of this massive women's movement that started in the early 1960s after the decriminalization of the birth control pill, or after the invention of it, really, and the legalization of it. And so, you know, women were demanding equal rights in the workplace, as well as other venues, of course. And so Reagan basically just said, hey, women want to work? Great, let them go to work. We'll just cut the wages of the men, or of the single wage earners, and, you know, we'll have two wage earner households making the same amount of money. It'll double our workforce. It'll make a lot more money for our employers, for our big corporations. And, you know, the average American family can stay right where they are because now they have two wage earners. Well, you know, if you're going to do that, and as I said, it wasn't just some nefarious plot by Ronald Reagan. In large part, this was an outcome of the women's movement and of the birth control pill and of the legalization of abortion. If you're going to have that, then you have to do what every other developed country in the world does, which is, you know, provide funding for health care. Norway is at the top of the OECD list on this. The OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, it's the I believe it's 34. I could be wrong on the number, you know, fact check me on that, but it's something like that. It's around 30 of the wealthiest nations in the world are all members of the OECD. And so when we talk about the developed world and developed nations, typically what we're talking about is OECD countries. It's us, it's Europe, there's a few in Central and South America, there, you know, Taiwan, South Korea. So the OECD average of support for childcare is $14,436 per child. On average, across all the OECD countries. Now that includes the United States, where we pay on average $500 per child per year, 500 bucks. Norway, at the top of the list, spends $29,276 per child per year. At the bottom of the OECD list, other than the United States, I mean, we're at the very bottom at 500 bucks. Next up above us is Hungary, which spends $7,222 per year per child on child care. So basically, the entire rest of the world is doing essentially the same thing the United States is, which is making this transition to two wage earner families. Now, in most cases, in Europe, Central, South America, Asia, what that means is that those families have been able to go from being in the middle class to being in the upper middle class. In the United States, it means we've been able to stay stable, to stay stationary. And one of the reasons that American families are not making that transition from the middle class to the upper middle class is because they're having to pay $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a year in child care. The other ripoff, in addition to child care, is paid sick leave. The United States is the only developed country in the world that does not have a federal paid sick leave policy. Literally the only one. Other countries have it, you know, all across the world. In Germany, paid sick leave is paid for by the government. In fact, the government allocates 2.3% of GDP for the purpose of paying paid sick leave. Other countries, like Luxembourg, require employers to cover the first 3 months. Luxembourg is that case. I mean, in some it's weeks, and some it's months. And then it rolls over to the government. But every other developed country in the world, except the United States, requires paid sick leave. I mean, seriously, do you want the guy serving your food to you at the restaurant, or the cook cooking it, who has flu because they don't have paid sick leave, so they showed up for work? Do you really want them sneezing on your food before they hand it to you? I mean, there's a public health issue here, as well as just a common human decency and morality issue. And it's not just the OECD countries. 98 countries in the world have paid sick leave or paid child care, or both. Except us. We have neither. I think it's time to get our act together on this. I think this is a big deal. I think we need to be paying serious attention to it. We need to be bringing about some very real changes here and making it all possible. for American families to, like the families of every other developed country in the world, basically, stand on their own 2 feet, have a decent standard of living, and not work themselves to death.